When you're at Caesar's Palace, every time you fart, it winds up on television. And when the corner's trying to tell you something, there's always a microphone stuck in your face. Emanuel Stewart defended his decision to cut Hearns sparring a week before the fight. "We've learnt from some of the mistakes we made with the Leonard fight," said Stewart. "We trained a little too hard for Leonard, but we've learnt to adjust since." Stewart expressed surprise that Hagler was still sparring a few days before the fight. "Every trainer knows his own fighter, and I've certainly never criticised Goody. But I really think Marvin's worked himself too hard," said Stewart. "I think he's so hyper for this that around the 6th round he's going to be exhausted." Although Hagler had been a middleweight throughout his career, Hearns was moving up from the lighter weights. The hitman at 6'1" towered over the champion and taunted Hagler, calling him a midget. Hearns had a 4-inch height advantage on Hagler. Hagler responded by describing Hearns as a freak. "He ought to be playing basketball instead of trying to fight me," said Marvin. Apart from the obligatory press appearances, Hagler remained sequestered in his room at Caesar's Palace. On the other hand, Hearns strolled around the premises, accompanied by his sizable entourage from Detroit. One evening in the casino, Hearns was seen at a craps table. Anticipation over the fight made Hagler-Hearns the casino's hottest affair in years. And with an event this big, the whole pecking order changes. A customer with a 5-figure credit line might have been accustomed to a 2-bedroom suite, but he was going to have to make do with a single room because the $1 million bettors had first crack at the suites. The champion's own quarters at Caesars consisted of a 2-bedroom suite whose decor was best described as early American whorehouse. The walls were purple with mirrors installed on the ceilings. Above the beds, a brass plaque, presumably temporary, on the door identified it as the Marvelous Marvin Hagler suite. "I guess I'm getting a little seniority around here by now," Hagler remarked with a laugh when he saw his digs. By the weekend, the glitterati were flocking to Caesars, and the local press solicited opinions from seemingly all of them. Tom Selleck, Tip O'Neill, Julius Irving were all picking Hagler, while Eddie Murphy, Steve Jobs, Buddy Hackett, they liked Hearns in the fight. Siegfried and Roy were divided in their opinions, while the members of the Fifth Dimension split 3-2 in Hagler's favor. Even Liberace got into the act. He said Hagler once asked him if he knew how to fight. Liberace told a Las Vegas magazine, "When you dress the way I do, you better know how to fight." 89-year-old George Burns joined Kirk Douglas in ducking the issue. "Hagler and Hearns are both tough," said the man who once played God. "I could pick a winner, but I wouldn't want the other one to get mad at me. I may be old, but I want to get older." The Detroit News even managed to track down Caveman Lee in the Sneezer. 3 years earlier, Hearns' one-time stablemate had been knocked out by Hagler in 67 seconds. Now he was doing hard time in the state penitentiary in Jackson, Michigan, after an unsuccessful bank robbery. "Tell Tommy I love him, and I'm pulling for him all the way," Caveman told Mike O'Hara. "I got $20 riding on him, and I'm in here and I only make $60 a month." Mike Katz based his analysis following the training camp conversation with Hearns, went on the record picking Hagler in 3. Ah, damn, Mike. Spot on the money. I wonder if he took a bet. 2 days before the fight, Jake LaMotta was married for the 6th time. Around the corner from Caesars, at the Maxim's Wedding Chapel, Sugar Ray Robinson, who had in his heyday engaged the Raging Bull in 6 brutal fights and won 5 of them, was the best man. ABC's Good Morning America was in town from a remote location set up in the corridor ring at Caesars, both Monday and Tuesday morning, airing the profiles of Hagler and Hearns, with David Hartman interviewing Goody Petronelli and Emanuel Stewart on the morning of the fight. On Tuesday, Hartman promised to interview the winner along with special guest Ray Leonard, who was at the time a CBS employee. The weigh-in took place on the morning of the fight, and given the verbal sparring that had preceded the bout, the final pre-fight encounter proceeded with dignity. Hagler weighed 159 1/4, Hearns half a pound more. The two men exchanged glances, but no words, and quickly returned to their respective rooms. The celebrity-studded audience at the outdoor arena numbered to be around 15,200. Aram admitted that the closed-circuit numbers would fall short of his expectations, although an estimated 1.2 million viewers bought Hagler and Hearns. It fell shy of the 1971 record set by Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, which was billed as the fight of the century. While the undistinguished undercard played out in the stadium 100 yards away, Hagler sat sequestered in his room. He could hear the hoops and hollers from Hearns' quarters down the hall, where seemingly the entire crowd had gathered. "That's all right," Marvin told Petronelli. "He can't take them all into the ring. It's just going to be me and him." Emmanuel Stewart, great trainer, he says, "I never got a chance to finish wrapping Hearns' hands the way I wanted to that night," revealed Emmanuel Stewart. "While I was in the middle of wrapping his hands, an argument broke out between Tommy's brother Billy and one of the security people, and I had to leave in the middle of wrapping Hearns' hands to go take care of that. With over $10 million committed to the main event, there evidently wasn't much left for the preliminary fighters." The fight was accompanied by a disappointed undercard. The Kronk Gym split in two fights among the supporting acts, with light heavyweight Ricky Womack outpointing David Vedder, while the up-and-coming Luis Santana scored an upset when he stopped Stewart welterweight Darrell Chambers in 3. Angelo Dundee-trained heavyweight Alex Williamson fought to a draw with Canadian Willie DeWitt in what was supposed to be the co-feature. Eddie Futch-trained Cuban junior welterweight Alex Cubanito Perez was awarded a decision over Pat Jefferson. The crowd lustily booed the decision. Hearns and his substantial entourage marched into the strains of Hail to the Victors, the University of Michigan fight song. Hagler chose John Philip Sousa's Stars and Stripes Forever for his entrance music. Before the fighters were introduced, Doc Severinsen did a solo rendition of the national anthem. Even as Severinsen's trumpet notes were echoing through the outdoor stadium, Billy Hearns was taunting Hagler from across the ring. Seemingly oblivious, Marvin continued to shadowbox. "I saw him," recalled Hagler. "I was thinking right then, all you're going to do is get your brother's ass kicked." The opening bell finally rang, unleashing 8 minutes of mesmerizing action. Hearns and Hagler tore out of their respective corners and were immediately consumed in a war which no quarter was given and none expected. Less than 10 seconds into the fight, it had already become apparent that whichever way this one ended, the judges' opinions weren't going to matter. Hagler and Hearns engaged with unsurpassed ferocity, Tommy firing rights at Hagler, who had his head down and resolutely marched in, letting go big right hands and left hooks from his southpaw stance. The conventional wisdom was that at some point it would come down to a test of Hearns' right hand and Hagler's head. And with Marvin charging right at Tommy, the anticipated encounter wasn't long in coming. Early in the wild first round, Hearns rocked Hagler with a right uppercut that momentarily appeared to have stunned the champion, but Marvin continued to surge forwards. "I wanted him to know who was the boss from the opening round," Hagler said. "I knew I could take everything he had." With a minute left in the first, Hagler was pursuing Hearns towards the challenger's corner when Hearns landed a right that opened a deep cut to Marvin's forehead. Blood leaked from the wound, but by the end of the round, Hagler had trapped Hearns in his own corner and was almost landing at will. Just inside the 10-second mark, Hagler landed a left-right combination that appeared to shake Hearns to his boots. "At first I was wondering when this guy was going to stop punching, but I was sorry to see the round end," Hagler reflected later. "I hated to give Tommy a chance to go back to his corner and recover." The furious first round had delighted the crowd and drew comparisons to some of the great opening stanzas: Graziano Zale, Torres Tiger, Frazier Quarry, Dempsey Furpo. But in the corner between rounds, Goody Petronelli had other matters in hand. "Don't worry about the cut," he told Hagler as he swabbed away at the wound. "Close your eyes," he warned the champion as he poured adrenaline solution into the cut. Hagler's cut was nearly in the center of his forehead, and while his bald head accentuated the appearance of the gore as it spread across his glistening head and ran down into his face, it could have been much worse. Had the wound been to one side or the other, the blood could have almost flowed straight down into Hagler's eyes. Because he was the one who was bleeding, Hagler's corner was the focus of attention. But across the ring, there was also cause for concerns. When Tommy came back to the corner after the first round, he told Emanuel Stewart that his hand was broke. "What do you mean? Is it sore?" "No," said Hearns, "it's broke." Stewart said, "The idea of quitting never entered my mind. That just wasn't who Thomas Hearns was." Hagler charged out of his corner to land a long right, but Hearns avoided further damage by retreating. With Hearns on the run, Hagler briefly but inexplicably switched to an orthodox attack. There were other times in the fight where he waded in with such a two-fisted attack that it would have been difficult to tell which hand he was leading with. Hearns, who had fought the first as if he expected it to be a one-round fight, was much more cautious in the second, attempting to maintain his range. He did his best to jab away at Hagler from a safer distance. Later in the second, Hearns appeared to be in full retreat, doing his best to counterpunch against Hagler's charge. But his own right hands were now increasingly wild. Hagler's jab seemed to be finding a mark now, as the champion repeatedly cut the ring off to take away Hearns' avenues of escape. A Hagler left caught Hearns off balance and momentarily appeared to stagger him. The challenger's spindly legs were beginning to look suspect. "Box, Tommy, box," shouted Stewart. "It's pretty tough to box," said Ralph Citro, the boxing record keeper, working as the cutman in Hearns' corner, when you're being attacked by a swarm of bees. Towards the end of the round, Hagler trapped Hearns on the ropes, as he had in the first. Just before the first bell, Marvin landed a right-left combination, followed by another right hook. All three punches appeared to find their mark. Hearns wobbled back to his corner, and Petronelli went back to work on the cut between rounds. "I was a little worried that they might stop the fight because of the cut," Hagler confessed later. As the third round began, Hagler again switched to an orthodox stance and landed 3 straight right-hand leads. But half a minute into the round, the blood was pouring so copiously from Hagler's cut that he halted the action and brought the ringside physician to look at the condition of Hagler's cut. Donald Romeo asked Hagler if he could see, and Hagler said, "Sure, I can see fine." Hagler would later claim that he told Romeo, "I ain't missing him, am I?" Apparently, there are tapes of the doctor's visit to the corner suggesting that Hagler actually did utter that classic line. But according to the author of this book, he must have been an even better ventriloquist than he was a boxer. Okay. Hagler was allowed to continue, and he went straight back at Hearns. Richard Steele said, "After refereeing for 15 years, I don't think I've ever seen that much intensity in a fight." Just beyond the midpoint of the third, Hagler, in pursuit of Hearns, caught Tommy off balance with a lunging right. Hearns staggered drunkenly to the other side of the ring, finally coming to a halt when he believed himself to be out of harm's way. As Hearns began to turn his head, he almost tried to con Marvin by smirking, insinuating that he wasn't hurt, when he realized Hagler had chased him across the ring and was right on top of him. Marvin landed 2 crushing right hands, punctuated by a left that missed mainly because Hearns had already begun to fall. The first of the right hands started Hearns on a trip to the canvas. The second ensured that he would have great difficulty getting back up. Hearns hit the deck, flat on his back, staring up at the desert sky. It initially appeared that he might not get up at all, but he struggled to his feet and barely made the count. One glance at the blank expression in Hearns' face was all that Richard still needed to stop the fight. As he cradled Hearns in his arms, the beaten fighter sagged, and the referee realized that he was the only thing holding Tommy up. Steele gently lowered him back to the canvas, where he remained for another minute or two. It was really the only way to fight a guy like Tommy, Hagler said. I had to go inside. I had to work him over. I told you I'd cut him down like a tree, and I did just that. As Hagler celebrated across the ring, QB Hearns, the gentle Kronk giant, bent over to pick up Hearns and carried him like a baby across the ring. QB was dressed in a white dinner jacket, and the picture of the big man holding up Tommy appeared in papers all around the world. Rudimentary computerized statistics of the day revealed that Hagler had unleashed a combination of 339 punches in just 8 minutes of boxing, and that each had landed well over half the punches he threw. Hagler connected on 96 of 173. Tommy Hearns 94 of 166. I want to give Tommy all the credit in the world, said Hagler. He put up an excellent fight. He came out the only way he could if he wanted to take something away from the champion. Emanuel Stewart would say years later that Hearns fought the last 5 minutes of the 8-minute dance on raw courage alone. After the first round, said Stewart, his hand was broken, his legs were gone. But that night, Tommy told me not to mention anything about the hand. He said he didn't want to take anything away from Hagler's victory. That's the type of guy Tommy was. So we wrapped it real good and put ice on it. Tommy didn't even go to the hospital that night because word would have leaked out. We gave him some pain pills, but he didn't see a doctor about it until we got back to Detroit. He came in, he took my best shots, and he fought his ass off, said Hearns of Hagler. It was a roll of the dice, said Citro. They both had to gamble. Hagler gambled, and he won. Hearns gambled and lost. I think he just punched himself out. In Citro's medical opinion, Hagler would have been stopped with the cut had Hearns been able to last another round or two. A cut like that, just spurting blood all night long. He said by the time Steele stopped it, Hagler was also sporting a cut across the bridge of his nose. Once revived, a weary Hearns, accompanied by Stewart, made his way along the corridors in the sports pavilion and presented himself in Hagler's dressing room to offer him his congratulations. The trash talking of the past few months was quickly forgotten, and Hagler said, "You have a lot of class coming here like this." Hagler told him before, promising if I had lost, I'd have done the same thing. The two gladiators hugged again. "I want you to keep winning, Marvin," Hearns told the champion. "You were the better man tonight, but we both deserve that $5 million. Actually, Hagler's end came closer to $10 million, despite the disappointing take in some areas of the country. "We did very well in most places," said Aaron. "It fell off a little in the South and didn't do too well in Texas, as expected. The Northeast, especially New England, did very well, but Chicago sucked. In contrast to the approximately 200,000 buys the fight engendered in the New York City area, Chicago had only 20,000. When she laid eyes on her father for the first time in weeks, the next morning, 3-year-old Sherelle Monique Hagler ran her finger over the bandage on his head. "Daddy's got a boo-boo," she said. As it turned out, Tommy had one too. When he got back to Detroit, X-rays confirmed that Hearns had broken his right hand. Even though by most estimates it had been one of the most exciting fights of all time, not even its promoter seemed interested in a rematch. The devastating manner in which Hagler had finished Hearns effectively squelched talk of a rematch. "I couldn't sell it," said Aaron. "Even though the fight was a big success, in order to sell a rematch, we'd have to convince the people that if they fought again, the result could be different. Who would pay to see it?" 2 years later, Gene Mayday had a sports book on the Strip in Caesars, told the Boston Herald's Mike Globetti that the Hagler-Hearns fight had resulted in a $500,000 bloodbath for his establishment. All the money towards the end went on Hearns and actually made Tommy the favorite. But several well-heeled Hagler supporters, close friends of the champion, had swooped in to bet Hagler by knockout in the early rounds. Little Caesar's original line for a Hagler third-round KO had been 25-1. His people started betting it at 1,000 or more a pop. "So it went down," said Mayday. "But hell, they kept betting it at 22-1, 20-1. They kept betting and kept betting. We got killed." In the aftermath of Hagler's devastating performance, speculation reigned over the question What next and who next? The most likely opponent took his name out of the reckoning, and that was Sugar Ray Leonard. At Hagler's victory party at Caesars a few hours after the fight, Butch Lewis, who promoted Michael Spinks, wanted to put together a fight between the two champions. Bob Arum told Butch Lewis, "Gee, I don't know, Butch. Do you really think Michael can make 160? The idea of Hagler and Spinks appealed to Tommy Hearns, who urged Marvin to take it. "Sure," snorted Hagler, "so you can move up and have the middleweights." The most obvious challenger was James Schuler, 21-0, and ranked number 1 by the WBC and WBA. But the public barely recognized his name. The hope was that his anonymity might be overcome with more high-profile exposure before Hagler had to engage him in a mandatory defense. As it turned out, Schuler would only have 2 more fights. In the first of them, later that summer, he won a decision over Hagler's sparring partner, Jerry Holly. A day after the fight, Arum had set his sights on his next foe, the undefeated Ugandan, John the Beast Mugabe. "Mugabe is a hot fighter right now, and he's the one the TV people want," agreed Pat Petronelli. "We can always make a deal with Schuler, put him on the undercard, and promise him the winner. Mugabe is a dangerous knockout specialist," said the promoter. "People want to see that fight."